As we know, S3 bucket is a very efficient object storage on AWS. It is highly scalable and easy to use. That's why companies, large and small, keep on storing different type of the data on top of it. So protecting the data and preventing the data exposure to the public become one of the highest priority. To protect those data stored in S3 bucket, you might be asking the questions like whether or not you have stored the PII or the personally identifiable data inside those S3 bucket, such as names, home address, credit card numbers, and driver license numbers. Or you might be asking whether or not your S3 bucket's policy actually meet your company's requirement, and whether there's a drift impacting the security posture. And you might be asking, how can your security team got notified when there's an event impacting those security postures? In this video, we are going to walk you through a live demo to showcase how can you use Amazon Macie to detect those private and highly confidential data stored in your S3 bucket. We'll also showcase how can you use Macie and with the other native service from AWS to take the proactive action to remediate those risks. Now let's look into that. So this is our demo environment today. It's quite straightforward. We'll be acting as the security team on the left and get access to the Amazon Macie, which is a managed detection service from AWS, which is can look into the S3 bucket, managing your S3 bucket's security postures. So because it is a managed service from AWS, it doesn't require you to do a lot of heavy lifting. It's already managed and covered by AWS. The key thing is that it actually allows you as the user to define your own rule, for the pattern matching, and behind the scene, it also have the machine learning to detect, the anomaly, happening within your S3 bucket. And also, there are a lot of the managed rules that already pre-populated that you can pick and choose from Macie, which we will showcase shortly. And later on, with Macie's findings, which are those finding data, we can use the other native service from AWS, such as AWS Security Hub, to visualize it and also to integrate with the other further on services to take action to remediate those risks, such as using Amazon Lambda. But we will showcase in the other video. In this one, we will pretty much focusing on how can we enable using Macie and set up the rules and visualize those findings within the Macie's. The first thing before you can use Macie is to enable the service. Now we are on the console, but because we already enabled the service, so we can see all these summary pages. But if you are using the service for the first time, you'll be able to see the enable button. Click the button on the first page in the console and then enable and activate the service. Once the service has been enabled, then it would automatically collect the data and monitor the security posture of your S3 bucket. The other thing I want to highlight is that by default, Amazon Macie will store your findings data for 90 days. If you want to store those finding data for long-term use, I would suggest you to export those finding data into another S3 bucket. So what you can do is to scroll down to the settings and click on the discovery results. So you can pretty much edit the configuration here. You can either create a new bucket or select an existing bucket. What I did here is to select an existing bucket, and then, by the way, you can actually encrypt the finding data stored in this bucket using another KMS key. So you can either create a new key or using an existing key to encrypt those findings to keep it safe, right? And once you save, then you're good to go. And you can always refer back to this S3 bucket for those findings for long-term use. Another thing to highlight is that from operation perspective, we can use the Macie's to create the jobs and then use the job to take actions to scan and monitor our S3 buckets. And from operation perspective, we want our operators to have the visibility. For example, whenever a job is paused by a user or for whatever reason, we want the operators to get notified so they can look into that. To do it, we can go to the CloudWatch and go to the log groups. The reason why is Macie actually will store the logs under this log group. If we click into it, the Macie classification jobs, and we can go to the subscription filter to create one of the filter. So whenever this the event that actually matched with the pattern that we specify. For example, a job has been paused, and then our operator will be notified. So here we can create a filter. We can create a Lambda subscription filter. So in this case, we can define a Lambda function, and then to take actions. For example, to send out a SNS email notification to our operator whenever the event happens. So this is the Lambda function. We pretty much have this Lambda function predefined. This is the message Lambda function. When I say predefined, we actually need to define this Lambda function with the logic that we need. In this case, I already have this function in place. I define it. It's basically doing a very simple work to use the SNS service to send out an email notification whenever the event happens. And we need to specify the event underneath. So what we need to do is that we need a pattern actually. In this case, we want to specify whenever the event type equals to job posted by a user or posted by whatever issues, and then we want the operator to get notified. So with that, underneath the subscription filter pattern, we need to put it like this. So here, just for example, right? Event type equals to job posted by Macie service quota met. So this means we hit the quota. So the operator need to look into that, either raise the quota or to take other actions. And also, if the event type equals to job posted by a user, we also need the operator to look into that, just to make sure everything's working as expected. We can give it a name such as test lambda filter, and then test the pattern. So this part is really for the testing use, and we can click the start streaming, and then this subscription filter would start functioning. We will use this later on to validate. So now let's look at how to use Amazon Macie to define the custom data identifiers. If we can recall, we just mentioned that Amazon Macie allows the users to define the custom data identifiers or use the managed identifiers from AWS. And user, when they define the custom data identifier, they can define their own data matching pattern. So for example, if I click into the custom data identifiers, I can use the create here to create a new one. So I would just call it as a test identifier, and let's call it for testing use. Then the next one is very critical, right? And this pretty much is where we define the matching patterns within the documentations and the data that we store in S3 bucket. In this case, we actually want to define something related to a project called the Unicorn. So what I would do is I will put it this way, $I in the bracket, Unicorn. So this pattern means, so the Unicorn, we would ignore the capitalization of each letters. We can test it later on, so you know what I mean. And within it, the keyword, I want to put a project. And let's ignore words for now. We want to include everything. Maximum match distance, let's leave it as default. So in the testing, basically this is again a pattern matching definition that we let Macie know. Hey, whenever this pattern appear, just match it, let us know. So for example, we can do a simple test project Unicorn. This is just an evaluation, right? We can test whether or not the filter, the identifier, can actually work as expected. Now, great, you can match one result. For example, if we just try to do it, project Unicorn, right? So we just mixed uppercase and lowercase. It worked because we specify that the capitalization of the character should be ignored. What about this? Great. So these three patterns actually will be captured by our regular expressions here. Once we are satisfied with pattern matching, we can do a submit, and then we can got this custom identifier in place, which we can use later on. The next is we are going to create a jobs for Macie to start to scan and monitor our S3 bucket. So to do that, we basically will go to the S3 bucket and we can create a job here, right? So you will know what I mean, because here, let's zoom in a little bit so you can see clearly. Here we can actually select the S3 bucket that we want to scan, right, for this specific job. In this case, we have altogether 5 different S3 buckets. For example, we want this job to scan the first 2 buckets, and there are some further detailed information on the right that you can refer to for this bucket. And then if we scroll down, we can continue to configure this job. This one is asking if we want to review the S3 bucket, whether or not this is what you want. Yes, we want to scan this too. Click on the next. And the next is, refine the scope. This is very important because this tells Macie whether or not that we want the Macie to do the scheduled job or just one-time job. In this case, we want it to scan those, S3 bucket daily. You can actually change the frequency depending on your use cases, right? So daily would be appropriate for our case. Include existing object, we also click yes. We want to include all the existing object, not only for the new object that's been created within the bucket. The next one to highlight is the sample depth. Here, we want to set it as 100% because we want to scan everything within the S3 bucket. My personal opinion is that I would highly suggest to set it as 100%, especially for those critical buckets that you would use to store the PII data, right? And then the next is additional settings. We will leave it as default for now, and we'll click the next. Here, select the manage the data identifiers. Manage the data identifier. These identifiers were actually managed by AWS. So you can select all, but in this case, I want to just showcase, like, if you click the include, you can actually pick and choose whatever identifiers that you see as appropriate for use cases. And then you can also see what are the available identifiers. So the sensitive data types, you can see all these are the identifiers created and defined and managed by AWS. This includes address, Australia driver license, right? And Australia text file numbers. Not only Australia, it's actually across the globe. You can see Brazil, Canada, etc., etc. All these PII related identifier will be available for you to choose. So with that, I want to click the all to start with, so we can fine tune the identifier later on. So let's do all for now. Click next. And this is the custom identifier, right? And remember, this is the one that we just created, test identifier. We can click it and then to do the specific pattern matching as well, based on our own use cases. So it is a combination of a custom data identifier as well as the managed data identifier. Let's go to next, allow list. This is the list that basically is allow those patterns to, not triggering the alarm. For example, if in our specific use cases, we have our serial number, which is publicly available for our customers or everyone. So we don't want to create the alarm based on that. So we can specify it here. This is mainly to use to lower the false positive alarm. For now, we would leave it as default and move on to the next. Let's give it a name, test job run, and for testing use text, leave it for now. Let's go to next, review, and this will provide the estimated cost as well. And given we don't have much data in it, so it's quite low in terms of the cost. When everything's fine, we can submit, and that's about it. So you would be able to see the job in the job column on the left. So once the job has been created, we can go to the job column on the left. So here we can see, hey, this is the test job run, which is the job that we just created. You can see it is active, it is running. So what that means is behind the scene, Macie started to collect the data, start monitoring your S3 bucket. And you can see also the other jobs which were created by me earlier. So these have been completed, and you can see some of the finding in the summary or the finding column. So whilst the jobs are running, I want to go to the summary just to take a look at the dashboard, because this is the major dashboard, right? Macie provide to us to have a overarching view around the S3 bucket security postures. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see the data security, right? These are the major things that we will focus on to see, like public access, because it's quite common for many customers to just avoid public access for the confidential S3 buckets. For now, it looks green. All the buckets are not publicly facing, which is great. And encryption, basically we will look at the encryption, the status. Here it shows not required by bucket policy. So 5 buckets are actually fall into this category, which might not be a concern, but really depending on your policy, right, defined by your company. So you might need to look into if your company enforced the encryption by the bucket policy. So, and then the next would be showing us how many of the bucket actually would encrypt by using the default key from S3, and how many would be using the KMS key. And on the right, we can see the sharing status, and at the moment, all the buckets are not being shared, which looks good to me. And it also tells us if there's any that will be shared outside and inside across our organization with the other AWS accounts, right? And keep moving down, we can see the top S3 bucket here. This will be the top S3 bucket based on the findings, right? And these are the top finding types. As we can see, sensitive data, S3 object, credentials. These might be the things that we need to look into first. And at the very bottom, we can see the policy finding. So these are the policy finding, the high and low. These are the corresponding severity related to these findings, and these are the finding name. Next, we would look into these findings. Now, as our Macie job has been running for a while, let's go to the finding and see what's already available there. If we just click into the finding, and one thing I want to highlight is that if you're already a guard duty customers, then this view should be very familiar to you, because I think this looks a very similar style in terms of the GUI, right? Let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see. So here, I think it's a really a list-based finding format, right? We can see. And the first thing I normally do is to try to just sort it based on the severity, because we definitely want to look into the high severity findings first, right? And of course, we can click into each single finding. For example, we can click this one, and then there will be some findings on the right that's been pop up regarding this finding. So this finding is related to sensitive data, S3 object, credentials. Okay, so there's so the object contains credentials such as access key, account ID, or the private keys. These are the things that we need to look into further, right? And this provides informations. This will be the general information from the overview section. This will be the result. We already covered the result regarding those descriptions. And details tells us the detailed result location. We can click into it to see those S3 bucket. And one of the key things that we need to understand the resource affected. In this case would be the S3 bucket, right? We can see this is the bucket name. It also tells us some basic information around public access, whether it is publicly available, accessible or not. And if we scroll down a bit, it also tells us the other information like the tagging, and so this will be the tagging that we attach to this S3 bucket. Scroll down a bit. Yep. So this will be the general information that we normally can have from each single finding. So for every single finding, we can look into the findings, right, one by one as we just showcased, and then to look into what would be impacted. In this case, which S3 bucket impacted, and then you can look into that to take further investigation. And of course, within the organization environment, we might have many findings, how to do a efficient finding and search for those information, we can technically use the filter here, right? So we can click on the filter column, and if we know the account ID, we can type the account ID and then to type in the account ID number here, and then if and also we can apply for the other information, for example severity. We can filter out high, medium, low, etc., etc. So this is the explicit way that we can do the filtering. And also one thing to highlight is that to do easy filtering, for example, if we find out this finding at the very top, which is related to the sensitive data S3 object credentials, and we found, hey, we want to know all the findings just under this category, we can click this icon, right, the plus icon, and click into it. Then Macie will automatically create a filter for us, so it can filter out all the finding types underneath this category, right? So we can look into that. And also the same thing for the other item that with the amplifier icon on the right hand side. So you can click, for example, I want to find all the findings not only underneath this sensitive data category, but also find all the findings related to this bucket. Then I can click this amplifier icon, and this becomes a filter for me. Then I can click into each finding and then to do the further investigation, which will be very efficient for me to look at. In this video, we have showcased how can you enable Amazon Macie as a service via the console, and how can you define the custom data identifier to define the data matching patterns, and also how to trigger the job to scan the S3 buckets using the Macie. And later on, we showcase how can you look into the findings and then to do the investigation. Find out those S3 bucket that's being impacted by whatever findings that Macie created, and how can you look into those S3 bucket to do the further investigation. This is the first part of the video. In the second part, I will showcase how can you integrate those Macie findings into Security Hub, and also how can you use the Security Hub to visualize the finding and then to take the actions automatically to remediate those risks. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you find it useful, please give it a like. You're welcome to subscribe to my channel as well. See you for now. Bye.